Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stephen King podcast. This is episode 105, and I've been away for a while, and I apologize. I had some major data loss, and I lost a couple of podcast interviews and a couple of writer interviews, so I just getting back on my feet now. It's the first podcast of 2020, so a very belated Happy New Year to everyone, and we're going to kick off the year with a review of Dr. Sleep. And to do that, I have returning guest, Tyson Blue. Hello, Tyson.
Hello. How have you been?
Not too bad. And you?
Oh, not bad. Can't complain. Busier than I want to be, but it beats the alternative.
That's right. After this, Tyson told me he has to go out and shovel the driveway. So we're going to do our second review of Dr. Sleep, which is too bad in a way because we had what I thought was a really good conversation the last time when we discussed the theatrical cut. But the bonus is this time we're going to get to do the extended cut. And as a added bonus, next weekend, but me and Tyson are going to get back together again and record another podcast. And this time we're going to do a full review of Lock and Key, as well as Tyson is going to talk about his upcoming book in greater detail. So why don't you give everybody a taste of what that's all about?
Okay. I'm editing a book with Frank Darabont. It's going to be published by Gauntlet Press. It's called Hope and Miracles. Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, two screenplays by Frank Darabont, and it features the full original or screenplays for both movies, along with interviews, cast, crew profiles. It's got essays and interviews with several directors, including Greg Nicotero and Josh Boone, Mick Garris, and a few others. In fact, we've just added a couple of new people within the last couple of weeks. There's the short interview with James Cole, who talks about his time on the Green Mile, and we added an interview with Konstantin Nasser. It's a name that might not be familiar to too many of you, but he is a videographer. He did the special features for The Green Mile and The Shawshank Redemption, as well as the Mist and The Majestic. And so he offers a lot of insights. He's been a friend of Frank Darabont's since the late 1990s. And we're also expecting an essay from Steve Spignesi. It's my chance to pay him back for letting me participate in all of his King-related books over the years.
Awesome.
So it should, and there may be a couple of other surprises as the project is rapidly moving towards being locked for the printers.
All right. So there you go, folks. That sounds like a pretty good setup to me for the next episode. And we'll be recording that one next weekend. We're talking today. It's the 9th of February. So we'll be doing that on the 16th. And then hopefully both these episodes will be out within the next week or two. I do like to clean them up, so I apologize for that. And anyhow, it's great to be back. And I thank you again, Blue, for your patience in redoing this whole review. But when a movie is as good as this one, I don't think it's that much of a chore to talk about Dr. Sleep.
No.
That's good. Short and sweet.
Oh, I mean,
all right.
I wouldn't want to have to redo a podcast where we talked about trucks or something, but
yeah,
not to be confused with Maximum Overdrive, which I can and have discussed with you a couple of times now.
That's right. Yes.
But the god-awful Timothy Busfield made-for-TV version.
Yes. Okay, so it's been a while, and Dr. Sleep has come and gone in the theaters, and with a rather truncated run, as Warner Brothers probably did not envision. They were probably expecting, I'm sure they had high expectations for this movie, and I think we all did, based on the preview materials that we saw. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, it didn't land we'll get into that why. And it had a pretty disappointing box office run. So I actually feel pretty happy or thankful that Warner Brothers did decide to do a physical media release, because in this day and age where streaming has pretty well supplanted hard copies of movies and media in general, to get not only a Blu-ray of Dr. Sleep, but a extended director's cut plus a 4K version of the movie, you have to be pretty happy with that. And we'll get into the disc set a little bit, but generally it was fantastic to get that director's cut. And we're going to tease the director's cut at the end of our discussion. We're going to deal with the theatrical cut first, because that's probably the cut that most of you are familiar with. But the disc did come out last Tuesday, and I'll say off the top, and I think, Lou, we haven't shared notes yet about the extended cut, but I highly recommend the extended cut over the theatrical release. How about you?
No, I do too. Although it consists mostly of extending scenes that are already in the movie, I think that it benefits overall from that extension. There's a good 20 or 30 minutes of extra footage in it, which... And sometimes it's hard to tell where it is. I initially, when I was watching it, thought that some material had been added to the beginning, but it turned out to be not as much as I thought. I watched both versions back to back on consecutive nights, but I do like the director's cut better, I think.
Yes. Yep. And oddly enough, even though it's almost a half an hour longer, it's like, for me, it's like the Lord of the Rings extended editions. The extended editions actually feel shorter than the theatrical cuts because they flow better. And I find this movie does as well. And a lot of the quibbles that we talked about in our first review, and maybe just because I've seen the movie on repeats now, some of the quibbles that I had no longer really bother me as much, or they've been answered, because certain things that I thought weren't clear in the theatrical cut are definitely cleared up in this version. Yeah. I still have my issues with some of the stuff in the finale, but it's not related to the setting, but just some story logic issues that I think even King had to tackle when he was doing the written version for the Dr. Sleep novel. But let's get into it. So we'll start off with the story, and this basically is a bridging of the book The Shining and the movie into Dr. Sleep. And we get some of those scenes that show us a little bit of what happens to Danny after and Wendy Torrance after they escape the Overlook Hotel, which, as we all know, infamously survives in Stanley Kubrick's version. But in the book, King burned it to the ground. And in King's follow-up interviews over the years, and he must be very tired of talking about why he doesn't like Kubrick's version. He's called it at various times a car with no engine, or that, I like his comparison, is that Kubrick's movie is cold, whereas his is hot. One ends in cold ice, and his ends with fire and an explosion. So I think that the story it's very interesting. This is a sequel in the true sense of the word, Blue. I think you'll agree that it is what we want from a sequel. It doesn't repeat the first movie. It actually extends and builds upon the world.
I agree with you on that. It's an interesting exercise. I mean, it makes sense that as a movie, it would be a sequel to the movie, not just because it's unfortunately the version that most people would be familiar with, but. Yep. And I'm not a fan of the Kubrick movie for a lot of the same reasons Steve isn't. And in the special features, they talk a little bit, or Mike Flanagan and Steve talk a little bit about that. And it seems as though the carrot Flanagan used to get King to agree with his decision to make it a sequel to the movie as well as a film of the novel was, hey, we'll restore your original ending and blow the place up. And And then I had figured that on my own watching the movie, but then to actually hear the two of them confirm it was nice.
Yep, for sure. It's so if you've read the novel, the movie is pretty faithful, even though it's incorporating elements of the Shining movie. So it does a great job of that. Jumping down a little bit, so the balancing act is pretty seamless here. I really have to tip my hat off to Mike Flanagan and his writing partner. I can't remember his name. I think his last name is Macy, but I can't remember his first name off the top of my head. But I think they did a really good job of merging the movie Shining and the film version, and they adapted Dr. Sleep and made some changes that we'll talk about as well that I think they handled very nicely. And at the same time, it injects warmth into the back into The Shining that wasn't there. And it's specifically around, I think, the scenes, mostly, there's moments with his mother, but I think obviously the big scene is the meeting that he has with his dad in the Gold Room in the Overlook Hotel, where they talk about their battles with addiction and the struggle between their visions of what they want to do with their life versus what the world wants them and what their family wants from them. And now that I've gotten used to seeing the kid from E.T., Henry Thomas, playing Jack Nicholson, basically as Jack Torrance, I think that scene is really highly effective, and it just adds a lot of connective tissue between father and son that I don't ever think was really there in the original movie, The Shining.
Right, and I think that it was a wise decision to recast Jack Torrance's role because so much time has passed between the first film and this one. I think the difference in appearance of Jack Nicholson would have been too startling to. This is we've got the Irishman now, so he might look exactly the same, but it made sense to have somebody else play the part. Although I have to admit that I did not recognize Henry Thomas until I saw his name in the credits.
Yeah, same here.
The first time I saw it, and then the special features give you a clue as to how they did that. I mean, he shaved his head so that his hairline would be receding when he put a wig on, but the ways the shots were framed and everything, it didn't stand out as jarringly as it otherwise might have. And that's a scene that works particularly well in both versions that I've seen.
Yep. Yeah, and we might as well start talking about the actors now too, and the casting director, whoever the casting director was for this project, they did an amazing job matching up characters from The Shining to this movie. Alex Esso was fantastic as Wendy. She really invoked Shelley Duvall, but made her own character.
Yeah, especially the scene with the axe coming through the door while she's cringing away from it, which it was a shot for shot restaging of the scene in the original film. But if you had told me it was the original shot from the movie, I wouldn't have put up a big argument. But it's because it showed just how well she was able to blend into the character.
Yeah, and Carl Lumbly as Dick Halloran, he invoked the spirit of Scatman Crothers, but made the character his own.
Right.
He had a very nice, dignified demeanor, or added some dignity to that character that I think really helped the scenes where he was talking to Danny at various stages throughout his life. And I really liked those scenes quite a bit. I thought they were really well done.
I thought so too. And it was interesting that, that was one of the things that changed in making the movie. There were scenes with Halloran in the novel, but he was still alive at the time, but, and the changing it to him being a ghost or whatever he was and appearing didn't really change the story it didn't change it at all, really.
Yeah. So that was really well done. And then the little boy who played Danny Torrance was also very good.
Yeah.
And you can just go down the line here. Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance. Everybody likes Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
Especially since he played Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right.
I really have no complaints about his performance.
No.
I think he did a fantastic job as well. If there was one character or one actor in this movie that who I would have been okay with recasting, it would have been him, because I think there's other actors that would have. How do I say this? Like he's a great actor, definitely, but he has all this baggage from all these other properties that he has with him. So I still think that keeps a little bit of a distance, at least from in my head. I can't separate him from his Obi-Wan character and stuff like that. So maybe that's just my failing. But I think a lesser unknown actor would have, I think, just been a better connection for me there, because most of the other actors, except for Rebecca Ferguson and Bruce Greenwood, who only has a small part in this movie, they're not really big known characters, but or actors. But
well, the guy who played his friend was in a couple of things that I've seen over the years. So.
Yeah, he's in Fast and Furious. Yeah. The last one, I think he played Vin Diesel's brother. The Rock's brother. That's right, Hobbs and Shaw. Yeah, he played his brother in that. Yeah, I've seen him in various things, so that was interesting. Rebecca Ferguson, of course, we know from Mission Impossible movies, and she was fantastic as Rose the Hat.
Yes.
I mean, she had the sexiest character to play, obviously as the villain, but she took full full advantage of it. And I thought she just was a mix of sexy and evil and arrogance and nastiness and seductive. And like, she was the whole package.
Yeah,
And,
I thought she ran away with the film. It was one of, she took one of Steve's mid-range villains and really turned it into something spectacular. One of the best film villains in all of King's movies.
Yep.
Again, I'd mentioned it before, but I think my favorite scene of hers in Dr. Sleep was when they were getting ready to torture the little kid, and he says, "Are you going to hurt me?" And she goes, "Yes." You never hear villains say that. I won't feel a thing. But
yeah. And speaking of that scene, Jacob Tremblay, who is probably the most famous child actor in the movie, and I think a lot of people had thought he was going to be playing Danny or something like that.
Yeah.
He was only in the movie for a short time, but his scene is probably the most discussed scene in the movie. Yeah. And man, oh man, that kid it's
cringe-inducing.
Oh, he's just sold that scene. His screams and pleading and moaning, and oh man, it was and the way that Flanagan shot that scene was just so chilling. A lot of it's implied off the screen, but man, oh man, it was and his gang, his production creative team, and maybe it's him too, I don't know, but they have such an eye for casting child actors. If like they cast good people, but the child actors in this, like this kid that played the baseball player wearing the number 19 on his baseball jersey, Carl.
So we'll ignore the fact that I just got that. But
okay, and the bus was from the Tet Corporation or was Tet Transit, and then the construction site where they found the body was also one of the Dark Tower companies. Right. So that was pretty good.
And then Halloran's mention of Ka,
yeah.
Ka's wheel.
Yeah. And he's developing, when I say he, I mean Flanagan, he's developing like a troupe of actors that he keeps coming back to. Of course, we know that he's used Henry Thomas in a couple of projects now. He's also used Carl Strucken, who played Grandpa Flick. He was the Midnight Man in Gerald's Game. Right. And then the little girl at the beginning, Violet McGraw, she was in the Haunting of Hill House series. So, the kids in this movie, like, he just has, like, that girl was the perfect girl for that opening sequence to show, how evil the True Knot is. And I just thought from her to Danny Torrance and Kylie Curran, what a find as Abra Stone. Like she's great. She was fantastic in this movie, and she carries a lot of it. And we'll get into her a little bit more in later on discussions. But and then you just go down the line. Not all the characters of the True Knot were fully developed. They are a little bit more in the extended version, but Zach McLaren as Crow Daddy, Emily Lind as Snakebite Andy. I thought she was really good. The other ones didn't have a lot to do, so they were a lot quieter. One of the actors, the one guy with had the baseball glove. His
I can't remember his name now. I know who you're talking about.
But he played the caretaker in the Haunting of Hill House. Oh, geez, I hate that. I'll have to look that up while we're talking. But so he's got these characters. Bruce Greenwood, very small part, but I hope that
he was Gerald's Game along with Henry Thomas. But
yeah. So casting wise, the actors in this movie were just there wasn't a weak link. I thought that everybody was just great in their roles, and some of them like as we said, Kylie Curran and Alex Esso, who played Wendy, and Jacob Tremblay as that kid, that baseball player, and Violet. They all just really pull at the heartstrings. And then you've got Rebecca Ferguson and Carl Lumley, and man, they're all I'm gushing here, but it's casting is so important in a movie, and Flanagan's team does just such a great job with that. It's amazing what they do here. So I've been kind of hogging the conversation here on the actors. Is there anything you wanted to add about them, or?
I don't know. It's just the kid who played the baseball boy, as they called him in the movie, he was fantastic. Even the cast members talked about it, like on the special features, they talk about being in that scene and they had to shoot it over again because they were so horrified looking back. Oh, you're supposed to be enjoying this.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's always fun to kind of sit there and watch somebody who's really good at their craft on top of their game like that. When I was hanging around on the Green Mile set all those years ago, it was fun to watch people really get into that, especially Michael Clark Duncan, who was just starting out, but was still, I think, probably at the top of his game in that movie. But again, that's one reason that Dr. Sleep edged out It Chapter 2 as the best King movie from last year, was mainly because, well, there was a good script that did some innovative things with storytelling and a great cast that executed it. It was just that gave it a little edge to make it a really great King film.
Yeah, and to my mind, like Dr. Sleep is miles better than It Part 2. But I think we've had that or maybe we had that conversation when we did our first take at this one. But yeah, that wasn't even close for me. Like It Chapter 2 was pretty disappointing, and it fell into the traps that I thought it was going to, unfortunately, with reusing the kids way too much and not focusing on the adults. But that was expected, because that it was just too enticing to bring the kids back in as much as they did. Anyhow, so the actor that I was talking about is Robert Longstreet, and he played Barry the Chunk.
Yeah.
The gambler, with the baseball, who had the kids' baseball gloves. So top-notch acting all down board. I don't think I have to think of, of some of the other top King adaptations in terms of casting, as the Shawshank Redemption, obviously, and The Green Mile is pretty solid too, though I don't think it's quite as strong as Dr. Sleep. But between Shawshank Redemption and Dr. Sleep, I can't really think of a better casted King adaptation movies. I think those two are pretty close, neck and neck. And sentimentally, I'd probably still go with Shawshank, but I've been living with that movie for so long that it's.
Well, I have lately.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, of course, this is a Michael Flanagan movie, and he's been at it for over 10 years now, but he's really developed a style that I just find works so well in horror. He's always doing these clever little camera tricks that don't take away from the action or the focus of the scene, but they just really enhance how the story's told. He had a chance to do that a couple of times in this movie. I'm thinking mostly of the out-of-body sequences, especially when Rose flies all the way over to Abra's bedroom.
Yes.
That whole sequence was just amazing. I just loved it. And rewatching it again, it's just so well done.
I liked it a lot, and I thought it was very effective. I just wish I could have kept myself from thinking about Jeff Bridges' similar scene in The Big Lebowski.
Oh, now you've tainted it for me. I'm not going to get that out of my head.
But in terms of the movie, I thought he got across the point that she was projecting herself cross country. They both were at different times in the movie. Although with Abra, they didn't actually physically show her going anywhere, especially at the end where Abra just kicks her out of her head and everything. She just goes flying back the way she came.
Yeah, and I love that when she lands and gets back into her body, and she slides off the top of the trailer RV and hits the ground. Yeah, that was just so a beautiful melding of the mental projection and her physical body. I just thought that was. So he does those little nice things. And, like the scenes with Danny at the beginning going into the bathroom and closing the door, and you just hear the noise behind the door that he's put the bathtub lady in the box.
Yeah,
stuff like that. And then just showing like the mother, Wendy, going into the bathroom after Danny's had a scare and she sees the footprints on the bath mat. And then the way he shot that whole sequence with the baseball kid was just, wow. Man, oh man. Starting with that overhead crane shot coming down, and you see the stakes in the sand, and that some bad stuff's going to go down.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just knows how to frame shots that build tension. Like if you compare the shots that he does in this and Hill House to something like The Good Wedding, where that director to me had no sense of how to create any sort of tension with any of the shots in that movie. You can just see somebody who understands how to use the camera and the point of view to get the proper emotional response from the audience across. And it's not just with the horror scenes. He did it with some of my favorite scenes are in the hospice with Danny, just talking to the people that are passing away. And yeah, he's got a really nice eye for directing. I really love the stuff that he does.
Oh, I thought so too. And I did like those scenes. It's kind of like the heart of the movie is in those scenes in some ways, because Danny's full of doubts about himself and what he's there for and what he's doing, and especially the first one where the guy tells him he's right where he should be,
yep,
and so on. he manages to do a lot in the context of the scene without bringing the narrative of the movie to a screeching halt while he does it, which is, well, it's not hard to do, but it doesn't happen very often.
Well, that must mean that I think it is hard to do because people aren't doing it, right, very often.
Right.
But I hope he gets to do more Stephen King adaptations. I guess.
I do too. The two he's done so far are great.
Yeah, he's talking about one, but he hasn't really come out and said what property he's wants to do. And there aren't that many that haven't been already adapted. So it's, if it's not Dune McKee or something, and we know the Institute's being done as a TV series, so that doesn't leave a lot.
No.
Unless he wants to do a short story or something, or maybe something out of Let It Bleed.
Yeah.
Or as he's intimated even stronger in the special features, is he hopes King does another Aberstone story. Aberstone, the middle years, I think King said in the. Yeah. So that would be interesting too, right?
Yeah, I think it would be.
Yeah.
King's not averse to bringing his characters back. I mean, we're on our 5th Polly Gibney story now.
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to be our last, but we'll have to see. Know. Yeah. Oh, now I know. I remember what I was going to say. And I love the other thing that he does with directing. Like he pays nods to the original, but he also adds this twist to it. So the whole sequence with Danny and Rose on the stairs doing sort of like the reverse walk up the stairs, but this time Danny's walking backwards with his mother with the baseball bat.
Right.
That was another clever shot that was really well done. So there's this, and a lot of the stuff in the maze was really well done as well. The mine stuff going on there. The whole sequence played out a lot better in the extended cut, or again, maybe just because I've watched it more than once, I had less problems with that. So I don't know what Flanagan's got. He's got another Haunting season 2 coming up on Netflix. I think it's called something Mass, Iris Mass or something, Black Mass. I can't remember, but so it's based on the James Joyce books, 2 books, right?
Huh. Yeah, I think so.
So that'll be interesting. But he also has another thing about a priest going to an island. I think it's called Black Mass or something. So, and he's going to direct all those episodes. Whereas I think with this James Joyce Haunted House series, I think he's only executive producing. He might be directing an episode or 2, but I don't think he's directing the whole series this time. So yeah, he's another guy I have to follow now. Got the Haunting a Hill House on Blu-ray. Again, I was very happy to do that, and because some of the episodes were extended, and plus there was commentaries, and that's probably my main quibble with the 4K Blu-ray release. There's unfortunately no director's commentary on anywhere here, so that's too bad. I don't know if he's going to do one down the road, but I just love listening to hearing him talk about the creative process. So
I know that Frank Darabont had to have his arm twisted to do commentary on anniversary editions of Shawshank and Green Mile, and, which is.
But boy, once he got going, eh?
Yeah, they were both really interesting.
For sure.
Make you sit there through 2 fairly long movies while he shares his insights. But,
yeah, exactly. So then, from the technical aspects of the movie, and generally, like for a big budget release movie, I expect a certain level of quality, and in terms of special effects and the lighting and the music and all that stuff. And I thought that, this was a top-notch production all around. Unfortunately, I don't have played on my home theater system. I just I have a pair of headphones that do 7.1, which it's not quite the same, but, the sound in that was pretty good. I really like what composing team did with the soundtrack here. They made some homages to Kubrick's soundtrack, the recognizable themes, plus they added some of their own. And probably most memorably is that very low but steady heartbeat sound that they added to a lot of the scenes. So that was really effective as well.
And I liked the fact that that they started out with the original synthesized version of the theme used in the original film, but then when they were leaving the gas station and on the last leg of their trip up the mountain to the Overlook, and they brought it in with a full orchestra. That was amazing. Made the stand up on my neck. But no, I thought overall, I just listened to it on my television speakers, which are thankfully pretty good. I haven't taken the time to hook my home theater system speakers into it, but I thought that the music and the sound cues were both pretty good in it, as well as the photography was was outstanding. I love their use of color.
Yeah.
The colors were really vivid and sort of saturated. And there were lots of greens and reds. I thought they did a really effective job of conveying the mood for the scenes that way.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's an interesting trend in horror movies, and I don't know if that's something that Flanagan started, but because we are going to talk about the Lock and Key Netflix series next time, and that has a very similar look, and that one's even more vibrant, I think. Yes. And this very warm, rich, almost decadent color scheme that Flanagan goes for with his horror movies is, quite antithetical to what we're used to with most of the previous horror stuff that we've, or it's quite prevalent with most of a lot of horror movies is it's usually a very toned down, sometimes almost monochrome image, which from a mood perspective, I understand. So it's interesting that we're playing these horror scenes against such bright backgrounds, and it makes it seem larger than life in a way. Yeah. I don't find it detracting.
No,
but I'm just wondering, like, it doesn't, the more washed out look does definitely add more of a sense of horror or whatnot to horror stories. So this is interesting because I do think though that the baseball player sequence was fairly washed out, but that was more because of the background and the setting, right? Because it was like that sand pit thing.
Yeah, so you had all this dust in the air and it gets overall sort of a dull orange tinge.
Yeah,
and the lighting was ground level, was like car lights basically.
Yeah,
and that highlighted the steam coming from the boy's mouth and made it stand out.
Yeah, and so that industrial pit and the Overlook Hotel, kind of from the outside, they sort of had the same look, that misty, sort of washed out look.
Right.
But even inside the Overlook, the color scheme was still pretty bright. I mean, some of the hallways were darker, but the gold room was like off the chart, right? Like
right.
It was, and the bathroom scene, which I don't believe is in the theatrical cut that I remember. I haven't. Do you remember when Danny's was talking to his dad in the bathroom, that red and white?
I think it is, but it's not as long.
Okay. Yeah, because that room just like, wow. Yeah. When that comes on the screen, that red just like, whoa, geez, it just about jumps off the screen at you. So, and it contrasts so brightly against the white too, right? So right. It's, that's a pretty intense shot. So yeah, it's an interesting palette that Flanagan works with. I'd really love to hear him talk about it because, generally the horror directors usually go for a very gray, washed out look, and he's pretty well goes the other end of the spectrum on that, and that's interesting.
Yeah, seeing it, and it might be a trend. I don't know, because the carnival sequences in It Chapter 2 were fairly bright and fluorescent, or ultraviolet sort of, but the rest of it wasn't. But.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about Darabont's. Shawshank was fairly washed out, but again, I think that was the setting. But the Green Mile was pretty colorful.
Right. Well, it was down south too, so there was more.
Yeah.
There were more things in that film that took place outside of the prison, like at the warden's house and so forth, or even outdoors, where every once in a while you get out in the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's a very interesting trend that's taking place in some horror movies, and definitely with Mike Flanagan films. It's I think Gerald's Game was fairly colorful too.
It was.
Yeah, so
well, I was surprised at how he was able to keep the audience's attention through a feature length film that basically takes place in one room. And figured out ways to break it open and expand it a little bit, so that every once in a while it took away from being at just in one room.
Yeah, It's kind of reminds me of Hitchcock's Rear Window, right?
Yeah,
it's a interesting directing challenge to work from one location and keep the audience interested. And so you really need a good story, and you need some clever camera tricks to break out of that one set to let the audience see what's going on around the character. And
right.
He did a great job in Gerald's Game. And there's I think from a technical aspect, I think we've covered everything now, unless there's something else you wanted to mention. But
well, no, there is Flanagan's seeming obsession with what King called degloving in Gerald's game. Notice he trotted that out again.
Yeah, and it was almost just as gross as Gerald's game, though I think Gerald's game was a little more intense.
Yeah.
The skin got pulled back a little further on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Flanagan trademark, we'll have to see if he keeps doing that. So, and then we've touched on this, and it's hard not to talk about it earlier, is the balancing act between the source material and the cinematic versions of this movie and The Shining and the Shining book and Dr. Sleep book.
Mm-hmm.
I think Flanagan and his co-writing partner just did a fantastic job here. And
I think so.
As I mentioned earlier, I think it retroactively injects warmth back into the Shining, which King, always complains about was missing. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. This balancing act, he got to give King what he wanted to see cinematically with Overlook, is that it got burnt to the ground.
Right, man.
I was kind of hoping for a big explosion or something, but we never got that.
Yeah, even he admitted in their interview that it was nice to go back there again.
Yes, exactly.
And I have to sort of begrudgingly say that cinematically, having the climax take place in the Overlook worked better than in the novel, where they were basically doing all this on a concrete slab on top of a mountain where the hotel used to be. It just wasn't quite as
visually interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so, going back and the meticulous way they reconstructed the hotel sets from Kubrick's original blueprints, and trouble they went to matching the carpeting and the color schemes, and even the scene with the elevator full of blood was shot from where Rose the Hat was standing, and from her point of view rather than from Wendy's point of view in the original version of the movie.
Right.
But there's the detail they went into to restore all of that, and I mean it all showed. And then to see a couple of places that we'd never seen before, like the boiler room, I don't think we ever actually saw in the first movie. Since he wasn't going to blow it up, there wasn't any real reason to tease it.
Yeah. So that goes under the technical aspects, and how could we forget to mention that is the recreation of the Overlook sets, as you just said. They couldn't do it exact positive because some of the materials don't exist anymore or whatnot, but I thought overall they did a great job, and they also did a nice little nod with Bruce Greenwood's character. His one little scene was basically a recreation of The Office from the manager from the Kubrick movie. So yeah, they did a really good job with recreating the Overlook Hotel interiors for sure.
And even the shots where Wendy and Danny are watching television sort of echoed the establishing shots of Halloran watching TV when Danny was reaching out to him for help from the Overlook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's touched on another thing that this probably circles back to directing or story. But I like the contrast between the hospice scenes where Danny helping the dying people there make a peaceful and happy transition from this world to the next, and then contrasting that with the horror and the fear and the pain that the True Knot would go through when they all died.
Yes.
Because, their lives were based on stealing from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And stealing their lives, their life force, their steam, whatever you want to call it, their shining from them. So they were vampires in the truest sense of the word, whereas the people that were passing away generally had contributed to the world and built up things and created relationships, and their lives were built on love and trust and help. And whereas the True Knot was based on fear and pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of us, I don't know if I can't speak for you, Blue, but we're within the same generational time frame. Growing up, religion was a very big thing in my home growing up. And as I got older, I drifted away from it, and I'm no longer active in the church or a church going member or anything like that. And I tend to have my beliefs are more agnostic in general, but I do believe that there is a higher purpose or function to life, and it's this movie. Those hospice scenes are very hopeful, and it was nice to at least to have those thoughts that, we would when we pass this world, we still do exist in some shape or form in another one. But what that is exactly, we don't know. And it was interesting for when Dick came back for the last time, that he said it was painful for him to come back to this world, and his sense of time was totally lost or changed. So so that was that underlying mythology of whatever you want to call it. I thought that was quite touching and hopeful.
Yeah, I think so. And that's a recurring theme throughout King's work, especially in the Green Mile, which is a pretty hit you over the head Christian metaphor.
Yeah.
But there's that whole sort of hopeful thing. And the conversation with Halloran that you just referred to kind of echoes what John Coffey tells Paul Edgecombe in one of their last conversations about how being in the world is painful for him, and how people mistreat each other causes him discomfort too. It kind of turns this movie on its head. But those concerns are a recurring theme in King's work. So it's not surprising to see it here. Although it's good that Flanagan chose to bring it out and make it a part of the story in his version of it. Yeah,
for sure. So it's just a really fantastic movie. It's probably premature for me to say this, though. I think I was pretty strong about it than our first go around, is that to me, this movie is an instant classic. My thoughts really haven't changed. And I think they're just being reinforced on my rewatches with this. So this is something that I'm going to be quite happy to pull down once a year and rewatch. Mm-hmm. I'll definitely be watching the extended edition. I think it's pretty well a perfect adaptation. And with the extended version, there's not a big 5-minute sequence that's added somewhere in the movie that you get with other extended editions. These are more extensions of scenes. Flanagan did a pretty surgical job of excising material to get down to the theatrical cut, but boy, oh boy, there's some really good character beats between all the characters, between Wendy and Danny in their earlier years, between Danny and his friend when they're working at the hospice in the teeny town, and the train. And that train really looked like the train from, the Dark Tower, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So there's all these subtle little King Easter eggs, and I like the way Flanagan does that. He's much more subtle with them, so they are there. There's just a little more background with the extended edition with the True Knot. There's some good scenes between Crow Daddy and Rose talking about what they're going to do about Abra because she's so powerful. And it just generally clarified for me Dan's arc in this movie, because as we know, he dies at the end of this movie. Mm-hmm. But it cleared up to me why he was making that sacrifice, because Rose wasn't really dead. She was absorbed and he was holding her inside of him. So he had to close the door, he said. And so that really solidified for me why he sacrificed himself at the end.
Yeah.
So I like that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also made much clearer in this edition that Rose is not the only one out there. There's probably more of the type of beings of the True Knot, plus with those like her with The Shining. Mm-hmm. And so that was really set up for a sequel. And I think that Flanagan, maybe he was a little too showing us is what he wanted in the future, but he was really hoping that King would do more stories about Rose down the line. And King says, you never know. So we'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah. I wouldn't complain, as long as, kind of like the return of Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle's novels. I mean, as long as they brought him back with a reasonable explanation, I didn't have any problem with it, especially since without that, we never would have had the Hound of the Baskervilles. But it's just got to make sense. It's like Annie Wilkes in Misery. He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodle car.
Yeah. Well, if he came back as a ghost, I guess in a movie version that would work. But I actually think Abra Stone as a character would be better suited for a TV series, because she could have a lot of different, it could almost be like a Dead Zone kind of thing. TV style series would be cool, but on Netflix, 10 episodes for a couple of seasons. And then when she maybe gets to adulthood or something, they could do, maybe she has a big battle or something, and that could be done as a theatrical movie or something. She could become psychic Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something like that. So yeah, they could do a lot of cool things with there. And if they got that girl, Kylie Curran, to continue to play the character, that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll have to see what happens with that.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that was interesting about the extended version was that it was broken up into chapters, which wasn't the case with the other one. I'm not sure why he did that, but it was an interesting touch.
Yeah, 6 chapters, and each one, I don't have the titles off the top of my head, but each one was appropriate to that scene in the movie. And I
Right.
actually like that. But as a book nerd, I always kind of like it when movies have chapters. I just think it feels more literary, I guess you could say.
Yeah, the Green Mile was originally broken up with cards between each sequence that paralleled the 6 volumes of the original serial novel. So but Darabont decided not to go with that, which didn't really hurt the finished film, I don't think, but it was interesting to see it used here.
Yeah. So it's difficult to talk about the extended, we're talking about 26 minutes roughly of extra material, but it's all like extensions material of many, many scenes. I think Abra's father gets a bit more to do.
You get more of a hint of what happened to him in the original or in the theatrical release. You just see him walking out with Abra over his shoulder, and if you look behind her, you can see him laying on the floor. But it's all told in dialogue. You don't know what happened to him until later.
Yes. So we get that sequence where Danny and his friend are driving out to dig up the baseball boy.
Yeah.
That dialogue that we had in the trailer about talking about the Overlook and the history of it, that was in the trailer that was never in the movie, is now back in the movie in that sequence where he's talking to Abra who's in the back seat projecting herself. So so there's just a little more background stuff for Danny's history and for Abra's history and for the True Knots history. We get an idea of how long that some of these characters have been around for. Grandpa Flick's been around since, it sounds like, the Roman times and whatnot. And it's just adds more connective tissue to the whole story and makes it flow better. So I have no doubt in my mind that the extended version is the preferred version for me to watch going forward.
Oh, me too. It has a lot going for it. I mean, the scenes between Danny and his father is longer. They're Well, even the opening sequence with Violet is a little bit longer. Not as much longer as I thought. I thought they cut away before Rose got so overtly hostile. But you do have that short sequence where her mother's calling for her, and you see the caravan pulling off behind the trees or through the trees.
Yeah, and boy, that girl, she was such a sweetheart. It was such a well cast character again.
Right. It reminded me, both her appearance and the whole scene and the bit with the flowers back and forth by the lake, reminded me of the scene from Frankenstein with between the monster and the little girl.
And I'm sure that was an inspirational shot for Flanagan as well. That's a good catch.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I bet you he was doing a bit of an homage to the Frankenstein scene. That's a good catch. Yeah, good catch, man. So. You just earned your pay. All right.
That's good.
Yeah. So this, again, the extended edition is about half an hour longer, but to me, it feels shorter than the theatrical cut. And once you start playing the movie, it's really hard to walk away from it. I found. So to me, that's a sure sign that the movie's firing on all cylinders. So the combination of rewatching movie plus the extended stuff, it made all the homage scenes in the Overlook Hotel flow a lot better as well.
Yeah, I think so too.
But I still think that the sequence where Rose is seeing all the blood coming out of the elevator, it just seems like, to me, that's just a straight fan service moment that doesn't add anything to the story. If Rose would have, it's missing a punctuation mark. It's a scene with no punctuation mark. If Rose said something or she was reacting to or something, even if she just said, well, this is a very interesting place or something like that, but she didn't, there's no payoff to that sequence. So I just wish Flanagan would have added something there.
There wasn't in the original either, when you get right down to it. It was one of the scenes that threw me out of the movie, because I was sitting there, now, wait a minute, the elevator, it couldn't lift that much liquid. The volume would be that wouldn't really do that. It's like the way the woman in the bathtub scene was shot in the movie. There are 3 different actresses in that scene, and none of them look remotely like each other. And I was thinking about that. I'm supposed to be scared. It worked much better in Mick Garris' version on ABC, I thought. And in this one, they had the same actress playing her. She looked the same all the time. Yeah. And they interview her on the special features. It was kind of funny listening to some of her accounts, like going to like keeping her makeup on while she went to lunch and not worrying about having her bathrobe tied. So as far as she was concerned, she was just wearing a suit and going to lunch. As far as everybody else, lady walking around.
Yeah. And then she said she'd catch herself looking in the mirror and going, "Oh my God, I forgot that I look like this." So the special features, there's 3 of them, and one's pre-production and one's production, and I think the third one is just about the technical aspects of the movie.
Let's see, there was the conversation between Flanagan and King about
from Shining to Sleep has King. That's a big thing that we should mention, because King rarely does special feature interviews on these Blu-rays and that, and he's in these. Unfortunately, the one that he's in from Shining to Sleep is only about 5 minutes long, and they're just talking about the juggling act that had to be done to make King happy and to end the Kubrick estate. And then we had the Making of Dr. Sleep, which was about the overall production of the movie. They talked about specifically, as you mentioned earlier, about Jacob Tremblay. He had practiced it, apparently, that whole scene sequence 4 times. So when they got down to do it, the first time he did it, the True Knot actors were all like just horrified. And Flanagan says, that was great, but we can't use it because you guys are supposed to be enjoying this and not being horrified, like you said. So that was pretty. And then they showed the kid Jacob after they had finished the scene, and he says, I thought this was going to be rated G.
Yeah, he was just doing his job.
Yeah, he was having a blast. He wasn't emotionally distraught or anything, and his dad was there, and they were all laughing and joking. So that was pretty cool. And then the third feature, which is about 50 minutes as well, is the Return to the Overlook, and it just talks about the challenges of recreating that set and the realities of movie production, where they would build a set and film on it and tear it down the next day. So a set would be basically real for one day, and then it was gone the next.
Yeah, there was a similar thing that happened on the Green Mile set. The scene where Hanks comes back after he's been cured of his bladder infection by John Coffey, when he runs into his wife, who was played by Bonnie Hunt. I don't know if you've seen the 15th anniversary edition of the Green Mile. That has a Konstantin Nasser's documentary about the making of the movie is expanded until it's almost as long as the movie itself. And that has the outtakes where Hanks and Bonnie Hunt kept cracking each other up. And that went on and on. There was a lot more of that. I was there that day, and it went on for almost an hour. And it's late in the afternoon, and they just couldn't keep a straight face to get this one simple scene done. And had to get it done because in order to film the scene, they had to cut part of the wall out for camera placement. So they couldn't... And then after that, the set was going to be torn down, and the warden's house interiors were going to be constructed on that same spot. So, there was a similar thing to what they were talking about here, and where they talked about having them built so they could be nested together like babushka dolls or something, for just space considerations. But that's the kind of thing that makes for interesting behind the scenes stuff, where you got to pick up something about the day-to-day work of making movies that you wouldn't ordinarily know or see. Yeah, for sure. So I have the 4K edition, which has the 4K Ultra HD disc, the Blu-ray disc, and a digital code, which I haven't used yet. The Blu-ray is the only one that has the extended cut, unfortunately. The 4K edition does not. I guess you have the Blu-ray edition, so I'm assuming you have 2 Blu-ray discs? No, they're both on separate discs. The theatrical, the extras are on the extended cut. Because I watched them on that, I didn't really even check to see if they're on the theatrical cut. That would seem like overkill. I'll look when we get done, just for my own satisfaction. And the director's cut is on the digital copy that comes with the Blu-ray. So if yours has a digital copy, it might be on there. I don't know.
I'll just take a look. And the digital movie code, it doesn't say specifically. It just says Stephen King's Dr. Sleep. Not seeing anything here about whether it doesn't specify that it's the director's cut. That's interesting. The movie was out on streaming earlier than the disc release on Apple TV, and that is the extended cut as well. So if you have those streaming services, you can get that. A few of the other technical specs for the people who are really into home theater. This does have a Dolby Atmos soundtrack. It has HDR, Dolby Vision, and I think those are the other things that you need to know. I can tell you that the 4K version is generally, we're on the point for me of diminishing returns, or maybe it's just my eyes. I'm getting old, but I can't say that the difference between the Blu-ray and the 4K is is that great. It's more in the background. Details or have a little more clarity. Letters on pamphlets or stuff on the wall and that are easier to read. Picture, but it's just a little more solid in 4K. But definitely with dark scenes, the black levels are just crazy solid, so you can really see clearly, even more so than you can on Blu-ray. So yeah, the 4K disc is solid. I've heard from sites that review the disc that the Atmos soundtrack is okay. This is not that type of movie, really. It's not it's not an action movie per se. It's much more about small moments and then psychological and horror sequences. So you're not going to get like 360 panning sound effects like you would with a Star Wars movie or a James Bond movie or a Mission Impossible movie. This is a much quieter soundtrack, but dialogue sounds great, and the directional effects are even in my headphones, which mimic 7.1. The panning effects for stuff was really well done. So yeah, it's a good solid DVD release and Blu-ray release, I should say, and definitely worth for those of you who are collecting 4K discs. Definitely worth getting. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't include the director's cut on the 4K version.
Maybe they'll release it separately, so there's be like Lord of the Rings fans. Because why would I buy this now? I just wait a year and get the extended version.
Yeah. And you just have to circle back to the comments I made about the box office at the top. It's really disappointing how poorly this movie did at the box office. And it's even like with Stephen King, it's just some things have a certain pulp culture cachet that other properties don't. And with it and Pennywise the Clown and the miniseries, that just created or burned a pretty permanent mark on the pop culture collective. And I think that's why it did so well. And of course, the first movie had such a great cast of kids that really sold it. For me, the It Chapter 2 is a far inferior movie to the Dr. Sleep movie. I'll take a Dr. Sleep rewatch over It Chapter 2. I haven't even bought the disc because I don't have any desire to want to rewatch that movie. That's how disappointed I was with it. So
I feel better about it than you do. The things they did, and I didn't mind going back to see the kid characters again. In a way, it echoed the ending of the movie. The closer it got to the climax, you had both stories unwinding at the same time, going back and forth, sometimes even within chapters. And they thoroughly captured in both movies what it was like or what small New England cities look like, because I grew up in one, and it's one reason the one reason that it's one of my favorite King books is because of what I call the kid stuff more than anything else, even more than the horror stuff. Because if you want to know what my childhood was like, you just read those parts of the novel. Aside from this huge group orgy and monsters running around doing terrible things, that's pretty much what it was like.
Yeah. I had a similar type of upbringing too, growing up in a small town. But unfortunately for me, the second movie, the balance was off because they showed the kids too much and we didn't get to know the adults enough. So we never really got to feel the relationships between those characters that we were supposed to feel in their adult versions. And I was afraid that was going to happen. I would have really scaled back on the kids in the second movie. I would have maybe kept at the opening shot, which was the last shot of the first movie, and probably the shot of them all in the store window at the end. I think if they would have kept it to those two sequences for the kids, I think that that extra screen time for the adults would have been put to better use. And some of the kids stuff, like Eddie in the basement with the leper again, it just was not scary. It was just repetitive.
There was that, and then they introduced Bill's wife and Beverly's husband, and neither one of them ever showed up again, and both of them played major parts in the story, and maybe they could have put them in. I sort of figured, why did they bother to introduce them at all? Yeah,
exactly. And Bill's wife really came off badly because of that.
Although in contrast, we did get Peter Bogdanovich's cameo, which I thought was fantastic. But
speaking of cameos, the original Danny from The Shining is one of the players' parents or spectators at the baseball game in the bleachers, talking about number 19 at the bat. I'll have to
look at that again now that you mention. I knew he was in there somewhere.
Yeah. So it's I'm a Flanagan fanatic. Flanagan fan. I think he did a fantastic job with this and Gerald's Game. So I really hope he does do another Stephen King adaptation somewhere down the road. And yeah, this movie exceeded my already high expectations. And now that I've seen the extended cut, they've gone even higher. I think this movie is fantastic. It's a classic, and it stands right up there with the other King adaptations. My favorite adaptations: Shawshank, Green Mile, Stand By Me,
Dolores Claiborne, maybe. I know that was pretty well.
Maybe, yeah, that's pretty good too. Dead Zone. It's up there with the top adaptations for sure. I think it's probably between this and Shawshank. Maybe Shawshank will always be number one because it's my all-time favorite movie. But I would put this above the Green Mile now that I've had some time to think about it. So yeah, I think this is probably my number 2 favorite adaptation. And like these come along once every 20 years you get something like this, and I'm just hoping that down the road that this movie will be better recognized for how good it was, even though I don't know if it will have a afterlife that like Shawshank did, because it's a different market now with streaming. Media is so disposable, whereas before it was still kind of hard to get physical copies of movies, and to get the Shawshank on first VHS and then on DVD, and then it was on the Turner Channel every Sunday, I guess, for years. So I don't know if this still is. I don't know if the market's there anymore for creating that kind of afterlife for a movie like Dr. Sleep. And that's kind of sad, because this movie,
I think so too,
is pretty darn good. I couldn't be more impressed with what Flanagan's done here.
As Frank Darabont seems to be stepping back from filmmaking, he might be moving into that new front slot as someone who's you can depend on to make really solid adaptations of King's work.
Yeah. And we'll just have to see if we're going to see any more future stories of Abra Stone. So I guess I got crushed pretty quickly. There's is it Rue Morgue, I think, did a interview with Flanagan, which is really good, and you should hunt it down. If I find it again, I'll put it in the notes for this episode, because it's definitely well worth listening to. And he was pretty pumped about wanting to do a sequel to the Dr. Sleep, but for a movie that had a budget of $45 million and only brought in 73 million worldwide. You basically have to make 3 times your cost before you start to break even. So because once the theaters get their cut and the advertising, you have to basically bring in 3 times the money. So they lost money on this movie for sure, probably around 10-20 million, which is sad. And I hope it's not going to put a big dent or a dent in Flanagan's theatrical career. He's gone back to Netflix after this with a couple of projects. I haven't heard of anything that he's working on that's going to be done theatrically. But I think in today's world too, the way the box office has changed so much now with the event films, whether it's Star Wars or the Marvel movies and that, where you have to get like $1 billion at the box office. I don't think King's stories lend themselves to that, and they might be better served to be adapted on streaming services.
I mean, maybe if they could figure out a way to make cinematic adaptations of the Dark Tower series, that would be big enough and bold enough to sustain a multi-series thing, but that'll be difficult to get theatrical movie investment after the first one did so badly.
Yeah, and now the first try with a new TV series over at Amazon got rejected. So I don't know. It still might end up on Netflix. We'll have to see. Anyhow, that's my thoughts on Dr. Sleep. It was really good talking to you about it again. Do you have any final pearls of wisdom that you want to drop on Dr. Sleep before we wrap this one up?
Oh, well, no, I enjoyed it a lot. It's definitely way up there in my list of best King films. It's definitely maybe the best of the supernatural King stories. I mean, most of the ones, my ultimate top ones are actually real life movies, so to speak, like Shank. And The Green Mile, other than the miraculous elements of it, is basically set in a real life setting. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, because I knew it was a sequel to a movie I don't particularly like, but I liked this one a lot better for pretty much the same reasons that King did. It gives a chance for the story to end the way he wanted it to end, and it was nice to go back to the Overlook, and actually having it not destroyed was a good thing visually. I think it works much better to have the hotel there than it does. I mean, otherwise it's like a bunch of people running around on a campground fighting each other. And they already had one of those scenes, the ambush scene in the deserted park, where the True Knot basically gets decimated, kind of filled that filled that hole.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot to mention this earlier. One of my quibbles is still there's two. I mentioned the one about the blood, and the other two I have is the guns. Why didn't they take the guns to the hotel? I still don't know why he didn't do that. And the Abra Stone superpower problem, in that she's shown to be, and not just her power, but her character, her force of will. She's a doer. She's an action taker. She would not wander off in the Overlook Hotel to leave Dan. And King wisely just basically kept her off the board, kept her away from the conflict altogether, which was probably my major issue with the book, is that that just felt unsatisfying not to have Abra and actively engaged in the climax of the story. And I think here it's still an issue, but I have to say that it play out better because the time of the conflict between Dan and Rose seems shorter for some reason when I rewatch it, so that for Abra to not to be too far away, and yet for Danny to come after he's been possessed, I guess you could say, that time didn't feel so long this time. So her being, because she would instinctively as a child react, obey an adult, but I kept waiting for her to come back, whereas in this version it didn't seem like much time had passed, so I was okay with the fact that she was not present during the final conflict, so or just played better anyhow.
I thought they did a fantastic job with it. It's no complaints of to speak of.
Very good. All right, sir. Well, it was great to hook up with you again, and I guess we'll be doing it again next weekend. I'll try to have this podcast out before we record the next one, and I'm going to make a backup of it so I don't lose it.
Right.
But twice bitten, twice shy, I guess you could say. But so I got to start tacking up on it. Yeah. But I think we did all right this time, and we had more to talk about because we had the extended cuts. So sometimes these things work out for the better in the long run. So
although I did miss the exchange we had where we were both sitting there juggling, trying to keep the conversation going while we tried to remember the name of the novel that we were both trying to remember, that we couldn't, even though all I had to do was turn my head to the right and it's sitting right there on my bookshelf. But
which one was that?
I can't remember again.
And on that note, I think we'll call it a day. All right. Thanks a lot, Blue.
Yep.
And to all the listeners out there, thank you. And it's great to be back. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I will do my best to be much more consistent in my releases for the rest of the year, now that I've got all my technical issues sorted out. So until next time, as always, stay safe, but stay scared. The end. Bool.